So today we're gonna go over the controversy of spinal flexion. Right, this is an interesting topic. I don't think it needs to be so frightening and controversial, but if we look at what it is, I'm gonna explain why it's important to train and my history with it. I really just wanna clear up from someone who's been through the entire journey of back injury loop, not as an expert. What is spinal flexion and why do we need it? So first, if we look at spinal flexion in the gym, this is any time that the spine starts to round forward and you compress the front side of your core, stretching out the low back and mid back on the back extension. That's spinal flexion. You've maybe seen videos of me do this really, really heavy. You start very, very light. Same with the Jefferson curl. I've shown videos very, very heavy. You can start very, very light. Spinal flexion in the gym is just deliberate rounding of the low back. And so that's not anything new. We understand that. There's a lot of examples in sport. You can see field hockey, rowing. There's tons of spinal flexion. Life, there's no way around this. If you've injured your back over and over doing something silly like tying your shoe, going to grab a bag, you've gotten to know spinal flexion poorly. And so now that we understand what it is, I want to make a quick preface, right? I'm not here to convince you how to train, what to think about this. I just want to help the confused person like me 3-4 years ago trying to figure it out when I was starting to move robotic, try to be perfect, and avoid the movement that kept hurting me. I kept getting injured in the spinal flexion position in life, so my brain, nervous system, down to the back, neurologically learned this is off limits, this is a bad movement. Match that with the confirmation bias of the internet, an expert saying, do not train this motion, this is dangerous, the spine is not designed to be under load in flexion. So I was set up to avoid it for life. Unfortunately, I had no choice but to question that as I didn't escape the injury loop through avoidance. So third thing, if we look at the history, why is spinal flexion feared? Why do we see pictures of this and then people will edit a photo of your spine exploding? So if we look at first fear around movement and in the body in general, the spine isn't the first place that this has happened. We've seen this in so many different joints. Take the knees. The knee over toe debate, this controversy was backed by research. However, it's in the misinterpretation of valuable data that leads to fear, that becomes this perpetual illusion. So what I mean is, in 1978, the Duke study that showed your knee going over the toe leads to increased pressure. That's a fact. The problem was the false interpretation that that's a bad thing, that increased pressure on the knee is dangerous. And that took 40, 50 years for a knees over toes guy to come and exist and to very slowly, one piece of content at a time, demystify it, debunk it, be a real life case study, tried to not be an expert but a practitioner and explain in simple terms that are undeniable principles. Graded exposure to any area in the body, done right, is adaptive. There's no way around that in the body. Anywhere that you can apply steady stimulus directly to tissue, bone, joint, ligament, muscle, it will adapt. So now the back's turn at this. There's studies that show when you enter deep spinal flexion, again here, once you get to a certain point in this flexion, the tension goes away from the spinal erectors, these muscles all the way down the low back, and it will shift to the spine. In the joint, in the disc itself, you will have increased shear load, shear force in the spine. Again, that's a fact. The problem is the false interpretation that shear force is a problem. Avoid it at all costs. So just like pressure of the knees, shear force of the spine is not inherently bad. In fact, when you work up to it to a gradual load on a very steady increment, it's adaptive, it's not maladaptive. So the same way the knees had this false information spewed over and over and over and ran with in textbooks and further, the spine has the same exact condition about shear force when it comes to flexion. And further, there's even more studies that show in cadaver spines, cadaver is meaning a dead spine, usually pig spines. And they will show that if you keep bending in flexion a pig spine over and over and over, that it will start to degrade. The problem is dead spines don't have that adaptive property of healing because it's dead. So if you keep moving the spine over and over and over on dead bones and tissue, it starts to break. That doesn't equate to in a living human being with steady exposure and rest times in between that there wouldn't be a proliferation, aka healing, even more than you came in with. So, whole lot of fear around the back. I didn't know any of this stuff. I didn't even understand the problems. I didn't understand the confusion in the data. I was just following the experts, and I was trying to get myself out of pain. So that's the history of it. Now, if we look at why do we want to train it, we touched on that a little bit. I think one of the biggest things for us to get over is this idea that the back is something to preserve. Don't mess your back up. I was a trainer since 2016, and one of the biggest things that you pick up as a trainer is to cue people perfectly to avoid feeling their back. If they're squatting, they would do a set and say, how did that go? Where'd you feel it? And if they said, a little bit in my back, that's a red flag in your trainer brain. You gotta go, wait, okay, let's adjust something. You shouldn't feel it whatsoever. Same thing on a deadlift. You load your hamstrings and glutes and the back works isometrically and they finish their set. Where'd you feel it? A little bit in my legs, a little bit in my back. Okay, we gotta readjust, brace better, we gotta get into better position. So we're wired in the sports medicine field to think that stimulus in the back in general should not be felt. You shouldn't feel sensation of a pump, just like you do your bicep. That's just sort of arrogant for us to decide the rules on the body. That we can pump out a bicep curl and feel muscular fatigue and a pump here, and that's safe. But when it comes to a set of back extensions or spinal flexion on a healthy spine, I could get a pump and be like, oh my God, the same way, healing, but we would just say that's dangerous. It's trying to outsmart the body never works. We'd always lose that battle. And so we can't preserve what we don't have. Essentially, that's what I was trying to get at. I'm long-winded because this is a passionate thing for me that I wish I could have understood sooner. If you have been this injury loop over and over and over of getting back to lifting, getting back to squatting, deadlifting, and then you re-injure it tying your shoe. Then you build up your strength again. You start where I did with easier versions of movements, starting again, super robotic, trying to practice your hinge to no end, working through a kettlebell progression, getting my deadlift better and better and better, go back to heavy weight, boom, injured, like clockwork. Because if I keep trying to brace to solve and resolve my back problems, that's ignoring that the issue is the tissue. That's not just a cute slogan. Literally, there's so many layers of tissue in the back that will not build just through intra-abdominal bracing, just by getting tight and pressing against your weightlifting belt. You can't build the multifidus like that. You can't build the interspinalis like that. There's a muscle, interspinalis. Inter means in between, spinalis, spine. There's muscles in between every part of the posterior spine that really only train when you go into flexion. So if you have an issue at the joint, issue at the disc, issue at the musculature, you may need to slowly rebuild flexion to fully protect in the future. You cannot brace your way back to a full healthy back if you've been over and over and over and injured. So that's why we need to get back to it. Now let's talk about how, because this is where it gets controversial. This is where people get scared and it gets very all or nothing reductionist mindset. So first thing is we need patience. You're not going to get into spinal flexion if you've had multiple re-injuries this year. You're not going to jump into it in week 3 be free in your back. That's just not the truth. Years of injury will take at least months of steady progression. So the good news is we have multiple ways to start building the back. The first that I like, because it's so scalable to anyone, is first working tension. So an isometric hold here. If you've watched any of my videos, you've seen this, and it's not going to change. 2 minutes on 2 legs has worked really well with people, whether you're using some assistance or not. And then you can switch to level 2, which is a single leg hold for 1 minute. Now starting to work muscles closer to the spine. Like I said, those multifidus, interspinalis, some of those that are closer now, starting to stimulate. And then we start getting into motion. So we have tension to start and very modest spinal flexion. I'm still pretty flat back right here, but I'm shifting the load more to the spine directly. You'll start training so you can get full range reps, maybe 10, maybe 12 a set. You train that a couple times a week very gradually. I've seen this in real time with so many clients, online and in person. It's a confusing start because your back is so used to not being exposed to real stimulus. Imagine wearing a cast in your arm for a month. You get a lot of atrophy even within a few weeks. We have a micro invisible cast in our back when we start moving for years, perfect to pick up stuff, to get out of the car, using a lumbar roll always. We have started to essentially wear a little bit of a cast in our back. We can't even see what is decayed and atrophied, but it's there. So when you start training this, it's not like other muscles where you start feeling burn. It's metabolic and it's a good feeling. It's a good soreness. You might feel a little bit in the in-between period and have to scale back. And when in doubt, just go slower. Have patience. And so that's the tension, hold into motion. This can obviously go way heavier. I've done way over time up to my own body weight, 180 pounds on a barbell. You do not need to do that. And for me, I just wanted to make weak points my absolute strength because I feared ever coming back. But you could start loading with dumbbells slowly. You may never need to do a bar on your back if you don't want. But the point is, it's progressive just like a bicep curl. So let's talk. The last point I want to just go on this, I know this is very much just an organized rant, but where my hope lies with this is one, in your healing. I have clients that are 50 plus in my program, and they have a whole closet of all the back Band-Aids. They have an inversion table, they have dozens of lumbar rolls, they have so many knick-knack things, so as tools, and I'm not saying there's no value in it, but we run out of hope that our body can do the healing itself. Then we become married to these Band-Aids, and we hope if we just stack enough on that we'll finally turn the corner and get a pain-free week if we're lucky. That's not something to look forward to. That's not what the body's capable of. You're not that old. You could be 80. You don't have to feel that old. I know that's bold of me to say at 26, but I've been 19 feeling old. And I've gotten dozens and dozens of comments, and I please welcome anyone under 30 to please drop your story in the comments of your disc injury story where you were not taken serious, because there's hundreds of people. And I was woken up to that this year. So this isn't an age issue. It's a factor, but it's not the whole thing. I want there to be hope that we can understand the mechanism of this, that you can have a clear mind and make your own decision, not out of fear, how to train spinal flexion, whether you should, and we can demystify that together. And just understand it's risky to train spinal flexion. It is risky to round your back, but it is way more risky to never round your back. And many of us have felt that repercussion from years of avoidance. So that's my rant spiel on this. I hope it's just any theme that keeps coming through these videos is that I'm not trying to be an expert. I'm just trying to be real. And my history of this is through pain. And when I was in my 4th or 5th trip of physical therapy for all the injuries I had, I was 21. I finally got a job at the physical therapy clinic I worked at, and I was a tech for a year, and it just opened my eyes for life about the way we treat people in the clinical setting, how we train people when I was in commercial gyms, and then when I was in exercise science classroom studying. It trickles down all the way from the literature. And again, back to the same misinterpretations of data, that rounding your back is bad because there's shear force. So I don't think anyone's the enemy. I'm not trying to point fingers too harsh to any profession or anything. That's not what it's about. I think we're all on the same team. But this stuff isn't a hunch for me, and I'm sorry if it comes off arrogant or offends people. It's inevitable. This is disruption to an industry. It's going to be some discomfort, but I would just see dozens of people come in for back pain, get the treatment of tons, press ups till their arms fell off, localize the sciatica, get extension back, over and over and over. And then we would do the core stabilization, again, bracing, valuable stuff. If you see my other videos, I talk about this. This is valuable. But then we leave them there and say, good luck back at CrossFit or at track practice or at picking up your kids, and we give them lumbar rolls. Every chair in that physical therapy clinic had lumbar rolls, and the therapist had back pain. It was just like crazy. And so, yeah, I hope that this reaches the right person and it kind of helps you clarify and understand for yourself. Spinal flexion is not a scary thing. There's no one evil behind this. I don't believe it's meant like that. It just takes a long time for misinformation and confusion to get filtered through. It's cultural, and that's probably the most difficult thing to change, but we're doing it. So I appreciate y'all. If you need any more help, we got the BBB. All the info is going to be in the description. Send an email with your story if you need help. No pressure. Yeah, let me know what you guys want to see in the comments. Any topics regarding the back, I'm here to talk about it. Love y'all. Appreciate it. Keep going. Peace.